Good morning. There's good news, or at least better news from my point of view, on Lyell Island this morning. Around 8 o'clock this morning, Frank Bevan's logging crews headed for the cutting sites on the now world-famous logging site. And they were met and temporarily blockaded on the road by a group of hiders led by Miles Richardson. Eli Sopow, who's the NewsHour man up there, tells me that Richardson asked Frank Bevan for a private meeting to discuss something, and Bevan refused. I believe, too, that copies of the original injunctions, which were served on 72 of the hiders, were also distributed to those blocking the road. Those are the injunctions which call for a suspended prison term on lack of good behavior over the next 5 months. That was the court action in December. I should mention, however, in all fairness, that Sven Robinson of the NDP, who was at that time fined $750 for contempt of the injunction, was not there this morning. Miles Richardson said that he would be asking for meaningful negotiations with the Social Credit government on the Indian land claims in February, and my understanding is that there is not any likelihood of further blockades during the rest of this month. In the studio this morning, to deal with two topics, the conflict of interest not only of Waterland but Stephen Rogers, the Ministry of the Environment, and the tough battle that this man, Jack Munro, has ahead when the I.W.A. contracts expire in June of this year. On a change of pace, and it won't be the lightest topic in the world, I have one of the senior political scientists of North America's preeminent think tank, the RAND Corporation, here this morning, Jeremy Azreal, who is an eminent Sovietologist, former advisor to the Secretary of State, and intelligence officer for, take a deep breath, the CIA. He is Jeremy Azreal. And we're going to talk, I'm going to ask him if Gorbachev's winning the war of propaganda, if nothing else, on the possibility of the Soviet plan to remove nuclear weapons and bring us into a non-nuclear bliss state by the year 2000. But first, Jack Munro, Regional President of the International Woodworkers of America, after the break. Stephen Rogers, who is the Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources, and not, as I said, he used to be the Minister of Environment, was to be here this morning, but he cancelled out on Friday afternoon. Jack Munro is here this morning. Now, I don't know how Mr. Munro of the I.W.A. feels about this current crisis. The conflicts of interest may have weakened the case for those who want logging, such as Mr. Munro. Now, I presume that you fully agree with Waterland doing the right thing and walking away.
I agree that he did the right thing, yes. No question about it.
All right, now what about Stephen Rogers? Stephen Rogers, it seems, has a $100,000 tax shelter unit in Western Pulp, which is 5 times more than Mr. Waterland had, but he is not the Minister of Forests. What do you think that Stephen Rogers should do now?
Has to resign, Jack. There is no question that the Premier of this province has to ask for his resignation, and if he doesn't get it, he has to demand it, and if he still doesn't get it, he has to fire him. Canada has some things going for us, not a hell of a lot at this point in time, but we've got some good things going for us. One, we have got the British parliamentary system. It's a democracy, and above all else, there has to be honor and respect for that system. And you know better than I, in Great Britain, if there is even a hint of a cabinet minister having any kind of a conflict, he's gone automatically, without prompting. For a cabinet minister in this province, some kind of a silly mistake, a $100,000 silly mistake, it is ridiculous.
Which was not shown in his holding company, but it became available from the list. But on the other hand, Mr. Bennett's case is that Waterland had a direct interest as the Minister of Forests, and while nobody suggests, do you suggest that Waterland did anything other than be naive?
Not at all. Not at all, Jack. I feel bad that Waterland, however he managed to do it, got himself into this position, and I sure as hell have some disagreements over the years with Waterland on all kinds of things, reforestation, log export, whatever. But the guy wasn't a hawk. He was not a hardliner. He was a good guy. You could always get to him. He was accessible, and he did the right, honorable thing that he had to do.
I'll come back to a question about Stephen Rogers in a moment, but I have Eli Sopow on the line. Good morning, Eli.
Good morning, Jack.
Just you tell me, because you're on a radio telephone link without me interrupting, what happened this morning?
The loggers went to work. There was a blockade by the Haidas. The Haidas were served with subpoenas. Haida leader Miles Richardson asked for a meeting with Frank Bevan, the logging contractor. That meeting was denied. The Haidas moved aside. They let the loggers go through. Miles Richardson then made a speech saying that he wanted the Forest Service to block all logging as a sign of good faith. When we asked him how long he would give them, he was somewhat ambivalent. He said there's a meeting in February to discuss native land claims, and they'll think about it then.
Now, they then cleared away, so therefore it's unlikely there will be any blockading for the rest of the month.
That's the impression I get. Miles Richardson made a fairly eloquent speech saying that as a sign of good faith, he wanted to enter into negotiations, and that negotiating was the way to settle the problems up here, and certainly not by having blockades. But he made it very clear that they still feel that the land is theirs and no logging should go ahead.
One final question. You served with subpoenas. Do you know if these were fresh subpoenas to those on the line today, or were they copies of the original injunction and order given by the Chief Justice in December?
That I don't know. We never had a chance to look at the subpoenas very long. Once the Haidas got them, they threw them on the ground and they sort of disappeared into the mud here.
My thanks, Eli. We'll follow you on the noon and the news hour tonight. Thank you again, Eli Sopow, BCTV News Hour on Lyell Island. Thanks, Eli. Well, that's clear enough. Now, Premier, we'll go back to this. That's
Good news, too.
It is good news.
Yes.
Now, we'll go back to the question. Premier Bennett seems to think that because Mr. Rogers is Ministry of Energy, Mines and Resources and is not dealing with the forests, that there is no conflict. Now, there are some legal authorities who might well agree with them. Do you agree with that concept? In other words, because he's not dealing with forests, although he sits in the Environment and Land Use Committee.
Sorry, no, Jack, that is pure and simple nonsense. Rogers obviously is a hardliner in that motley group that they call a cabinet over there, and Bennett wants to keep him in there. For goodness sake, you know what kind of tax write-off you get for buying these damn things? Because I read in the paper the other day that Jack Webster has had his accountant dibbling in there for it.
Not dibbling in there for it. I made 3 years ago, long before Lyell Island, I bought one $10,000 unit, which gives me a substantial tax write-off, and God knows...
A write-off of $9,000.
Goodness knows I need it, but I'm not the least bit embarrassed about it, because one, I'm not the Minister of Forests, and two, I'm not in a position to make any decisions on anything. And if you're suggesting that I'm in conflict of interest, you're in trouble, Munro, for the first time with me in a long while. Are you suggesting in any way that my views or expressions have been dictated by the fact that my accountant puts $10,000 in that Western pulp unit, which, by the way, may call for more money on top of that, and it ain't such a good deal as it looked. I don't laugh about this. This is serious.
Obviously a soft spot, too.
The Vancouver Sun reported that I had sold my unit. I want to tell the Vancouver Sun that would have been a nice, easy out for me to leave it the way the Vancouver Sun put it. I checked with my accountant this morning, and I have not sold the unit. It didn't even cross my mind until this arose.
Well, Jack, there's nothing wrong with you having them, and I'm glad you got some faith in this industry. The industry hasn't gotten its faith in itself. But,
well, I'll tell you this.
But now you understand.
Just a moment. That shelter money supplied $200 million worth of jobs.
Right. Right. That's the point. If Jack Webster puts in $10,000, he knows that he can write off $9,000.
Plus a call, maybe.
Oh, if one plus, yeah, right. Plus a call for more money.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. Now, one of these hotshot cabinet ministers, simple mathematics times 10, if he puts in $100,000, he can write off $90,000 plus a call for more money. And he wants to brush this off by saying that it was a silly mistake. These millionaires It's an obsession with him to cheat Canada out of as many taxes as possible. $90,000 will be top in his mind, not some silly mistake that he's saving, that he doesn't have to pay taxes on.
There is
nothing, Jack, in this province that the cabinet votes on that doesn't affect the forest industry, and they can hush up or do whatever the hell they want to do. It is an inescapable fact that if you're a cabinet minister in this province and you've got investments in the forest industry, you have a conflict of interest. Regardless of what the hell Rogers says, regardless of what the hell the Premier says, they let Waterland go, should be the most powerful minister in this province, with one few-minute conversation with the Premier. Why is the Premier protecting Rogers with 5 times as much money in there? Obviously, Rogers to the Premier seems to be more important than the forest, and that's wrong. They gotta fire him.
Let's make one thing perfectly clear. There is no suggestion in any way, shape, or form that Rogers behaved improperly.
Jack, Rogers got $100,000 in there, and when you become a cabinet minister, you lose some privileges.
Caesar's wife is your point.
I don't know. I met her.
Do I have to tell you that? You know, Caesar's wife must be totally above suspicion.
Yeah, right.
Justice must not only be done, but be seen to be done.
And I feel bad that Waterland had to resign, but he had to. Jack, that's the parliamentary system, and everything this cabinet does, taxes, whatever the hell, water taxes, power, anything. It affects the forest industry.
It's good news from Lyell Island.
That's excellent news from Lyell Island, Jack, and it had to come. The sad thing about two of these two incidences is, I said in speaking with the truck loggers the other day, I know what the hell save the South Moresby, New York City position is, because we hear about it. We don't know what the hell the industry's position is as far as South Moresby is concerned. This industry hasn't got the courage to tell us what the hell their position is. Frank Bevan has, all by himself, and John McLaughlin, same thing. This industry hasn't got the courage, Jack, to say that Waterland had to resign.
And where were you when I was fighting the Battle of Lyell? Away doing some unemployment insurance commission.
Jack, if you'll recall, the reason you got up there is because we asked you on behalf of the workers to come up there. Now, if I would have got involved, it would have appeared to be political. But a typical fence sitter like you could do some of those things.
After the break. One thing I want to make perfectly clear, referring to Stephen Rogers, is there's no suggestion that he's in anything but in other people's opinions in a technical breach of a conflict of interest, right?
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that Rogers has done anything wrong. No. But now that it has been discovered that he's got $100,000 in there, plus a call for more money if necessary, he has to, Jack, it is the honorable thing to do.
Your attack is on Premier Bennett for not having enough the properly delineated guidelines with associated blind trusts.
Jack, yeah, they can't cover this up. And the cabinet should have followed the Premier. I agree with the Premier on this case. They should have put their stuff in blind trusts.
Okay. 5 years ago, you were cock-a-hoop because you'd hammered the industry into a 13% and a 15% increase because the big boys wouldn't step down, wouldn't close down any of the manufacturing plants. You were down at the truck loggers.
Because they were going to hammer us, yeah, right.
And no, they gave you an extraordinarily large increase. And
we had to go on strike for it because they wouldn't negotiate with us.
And since then, you've had 0, 0, 4.5.
No, a 0, a 4, and a 4.5.
Well, next to nothing compared to your old increases, right? And now
smaller.
You saw the truck loggers saying that they don't want to negotiate the Master Coast Agreement. They want a cut in wages. I was talking to some of them that went belly up because you vetoed the deals made with the locals, particularly Pete Rennie up at Spasm. Now, are you going to be realistic and go for a cut in wages for any part of the industry in this year, a terrible time of trouble?
No.
You're not going for it. Are you going for an increase in wages?
I don't know that yet.
So you're not going to go for a cut, so you'll probably go for no increase at all and some fringe benefits like your pensions being fixed up.
I was giving you a bad time. The answer is probably longer than no, Jack, but the short answer is no.
No to any wage cuts.
No to any wage cuts or no to any concessions. And, you know, the problem, Jack, I get so frustrated with this industry. A few years ago, they were telling us we have to increase productivity, we have to do this, we have to do all that. Our union adopted a position. This industry has to spend some money on its plants. If we work, I said it on this show, if we work in 30-year-old plants, we're going to get 30-year-old productivity. We understand new plants is going to be less jobs. As difficult as that is, we've tried to handle it the best we can. We've got less jobs. We are the most productive wood producers, I think, in the world, Jack. Our productivity has increased in Western Canada by well over 30%, 40% in some cases, and some operators tell us damn near 50%.
That's because your men are working full out now because of fear of losing their job.
Well, we got better plants to work in, Jack. We're not, these old dinosaurs are gone forever. We've lost a lot of permanent jobs. We're putting wood into the southeastern United States cheaper than they can produce it in the southeast. And in the southeast, they pay $6 an hour and they make lumber and plywood out of trees that are 25 or 30 years old. Because we are so damn efficient. We are the most efficient. Now the industry hasn't got, except for this public nonsense that the right wing seems to be on. The right wing is drunk with the role that it's on right now. This nonsense that is popular to say they want concessions. They can't justify asking for concessions.
Now, and you, of course, have given up any attempt to stop the log exports because that's the only thing that's keeping a large part of the logging industry going.
We have not attempted to, or we have not given up our fight against the export of logs. One thing Waterland did was he listened to our concerns, and while we're mad at the amount of logs he allowed out of this province, he changed the system. January 1st this year, there's a different system. Hopefully that will cut down on the amount of logs that we're exporting. Jack, we are one of the last finest reserves of softwood lumber in the world with the infrastructure to get it out and manufacture it. And instead of getting it out and manufacturing it, we're shipping our raw material, and that's wrong.
Your questions, one segment to Jack Munro now after the break. Well, what do you think of the prospects of logging continuing in the Mosbys? You were talking about the Americans who are big with their money and supply a lot of the money for the ads. There are people that want to stop all logging in the Mosbys.
Yeah, I know, Jack, and that's silly. Honestly, you've done a good job in explaining to the people what the hell is going on up there. There are a lot of places in the South Moresby, as you know, Burnaby Narrows, all this sort of stuff, that should be protected. There's no question about that. But there is places that should be logged.
450 square miles of primitive wilderness they can have.
Yep, that's right.
Go ahead to Jack Munro.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
I'd like to ask Mr. Munro, actually I'd like to precede my question by saying that a few years ago in the woodworkers industry, the union was pushing quite avidly for united negotiation against the united employers.
Right.
What I'd like to know is why Mr. Munro is having so much trouble keeping his union in line, and why he feels justified in asking for an advance on, or more wages in the future.
I don't know what you mean when you say that I'm having trouble keeping my union in line.
Well, there's quite a few defectors, people, locals that are coming out with votes. I mean, this isn't recent. This is in the past a few months. But it still seems to me to be a threat to the union's solidarity.
No, I think you're misreading it. There's certainly been some changes around, particularly in contracting, Jack. There's no question about that. But I don't think that our union is probably in as good or better shape than it has been for a hell of a long time.
There have been a lot of deals like Pete Rennie's where the crew will vote for a 6% cut and you'll go straight to Labour Board and say no.
Yeah, well,
and Rennie closes down.
Jack, there are some areas. Wages are not the problem. The problem is the world market is not buying enough lumber. Now, if we cut our wages to $2.50 an hour, we wouldn't sell any more boards. But the market isn't there. And the market isn't there because we haven't done a good enough job in marketing it.
But for the truck loggers who get their allocation cut by the TFL holder and whose costs go up, The only way they can survive is by making a deal with the crew, and you won't allow it. 80 jobs for any lot.
We've made some changes, Jack, for some of them to survive. You know what some of these dopey truck loggers did? They get about $1.50 or something per cubic meter, whatever this measurement is these days that I don't pretend to understand, to run a cookhouse in a bunkhouse. Some of them decided they're going to save this because the majors, you know, the hotshots downtown who live in these cement trees, were putting a squeeze on them. So they have got our guys, for goodness sake, sliding down a side hill at night, getting down to the road to ride down to a bunkhouse, and no cookhouse there. No cookhouse. Now, what the hell do you do, you know? After working in the rain, in the mud, and the snow, and the sleet, you come down there and there's nobody there. For $1.50 a cubic meter. What I would do is you get a bottle of whiskey and you drink it and you eat a burnt steak at 10 o'clock at night. And you can't work on that kind of a diet. The majors...
You're telling me they've cut out the cookhouse facilities.
In places. These hotshots downtown, in trying to help these contractors survive, took the $1.50 away from them.
No.
Yes. This grain trust that runs our industry.
You're talking about $1.50 a meter for feeding the men.
Right. They took it away from him. Now it stays downtown.
So therefore, if a guy's going in as a truck logger, he's got to take his supplies in with him.
In places. It's nonsense.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering, since we got all this import, I gather, logging wood, I was just wondering, do we have the actual manufacturers to build it in BC ourselves?
Sure. No question about it. We do. We could go to more shifts. These new mills are pretty efficient, and
but you won't go to a 10-hour day. You won't go to a 7-hour,
right.
A 7-day week. And the big boys say if you gave them a 7-day week, they could hire 20% more men.
The big boys don't know what the hell they're doing.
You don't run a plant. You run a union.
We run a plant.
Lamford Cedar and Sioux Forest.
Very good operation.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning. I understood, Jack, that you said that the export of logs that you were in agreement with.
No. In total opposition, too.
Oh, okay, because that's the one thing I wanted to make clear, that I think that giving away the logs like that, when we have the capability and the manpower to manufacture a finished product and export it, is totally wrong. It's typical of the government's policy and everything.
Right.
They're not willing to invest in production manufacturing.
Yep. They want to turn a quick buck, and that's terrible. Exporting some of the finest logs left in the world. Our 200 shiploads went out of here last year. Crazy. At the same time, Jack, pardon me, I know we're running out of time. I was at a building museum in Peking last April, I think. That this display was to show the Chinese about the different building materials and sort of whatever. And the United States was there with a good display on what they produced. France was there with a house that was, I think, 3 by 10s on 18-inch centers. We're going to take it. It's a waste. It looked like it was hewn out of the inside of a tree. There's so much wood in it. It was a waste of wood. It didn't make sense. Canada that says we're getting serious about the Chinese being good customers. You know, Jack, the word Canada wasn't even inside the building. Not inside the building.
That's abominable. Go ahead.
It's terrible.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack Munro.
Good morning.
Yes, I think, your great big bang up with the environment is the hell of a mess that your men leave after you've cut down all the goddamn good wood.
Fine, gentle language.
Just left everything in a one hell of a mess.
We don't run the industry.
With all their new technology and machines,
Right.
my God, they leave it in such a hell of a mess.
You must be a newcomer to BC, because you know that I have said, and my predecessors have said forever, we have to clean up the areas that
But
we
they
cut.
don't.
We have to plant more trees, we have to have better reforestation. And if we don't have it, it's the government's responsibility as the landlord.
Why?
Not us.
Why should the government be blamed for something your men are leaving behind?
We're the workers. We do. When they tell us, go cut that tree down, we go over there and cut that tree. And they say, get on a bus and go someplace else, we get on a bus and go someplace else.
Well, that's like paying the garbage man to throw it in the truck and dump it up the next corner.
The government is the landlord of our forests, and the landlord has to look after them the same way a landlord has to look after a house.
You're to blame. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm wondering about Japan has an 8 to 10 year supply of logs. They just sink the logs over there in fresh water.
Yes.
Is that true?
They're sinking them in freshwater bays and potting them on top. They got landfills, and what's filling the bays are logs. A lot of them from Canada, some of them from Weyerhaeuser in the Pacific Northwest. They are supplying, I think, 12% of the homes being built in Japan right now are from logs that they import.
Okay, let's say they have a 10-year supply of logs.
Something like that.
What's going to prevent them, let's say when their steel industry goes down or whatever, slows down, to finish the product and send it to Korea or China, let's say?
That's right. That's right. I agree with it. It's nonsense for us to be part of that. Everybody agrees in this world now that the Japanese are pretty shrewd businessmen, and they're not buying logs to be doing something. They're buying logs because it's good for their country.
Well, Lyell Island has cooled off for today anyway. There are no blockades in Lyell Island. Contract negotiations, your contract expires June the 15th. Are you going to use the usual slogan, no contract, no work?
We don't use that, Jack. I.W.A. stopped using that quite a while ago. Doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense, and we've had to negotiate into the summer. The negotiations this year, Jack, the tenor will be decided by the employers. If we want to get an agreement without a bunch of hoopla-rah, then we can get one. If we're going to have hoopla-rah, it's the employers that are going to start it, and we'll accommodate them.
My thanks to Jack Munro, I.W.A. Next, Jeremy is Azreal, Senior Political Scientist of the RAND Corporation, a Sovietologist after the break. You know, people are liable to waking up these days and think that the Soviet Union ain't all that bad. Talking about the new man, Gorbachev. And I can always remember President Reagan describing them with narrowed eyes as an evil empire. And then all of a sudden, Gorbachev comes out of the wood with a proposition whereby the year 2000, if his game goes, we'll get rid of nuclear weapons. It would seem to me, and Jeremy as Azreal, Senior Political Scientist, RAND Corporation, Sovietologist, former government official, intelligence officer of the CIA, you can tell me a few secrets. What is this going? I mean, I'm just an ordinary Canadian, and I think, gee, Gorbachev looks good. This may come to world peace, and then what the hell would we do? Hey?
I could tell you a secret if the Soviets would stop being a secret a good deal more easily. Gorbachev has certainly come in last week with a very interesting offer, and one that has to be explored very carefully. The exploration is just beginning, and the details of that offer have yet to be spelled out, and a great deal depends on the details.
If I go back to my Cold War brain setting, I'll say it's a master propaganda stroke, which means nothing.
Well, it certainly is a very clever propaganda stroke. The question is whether it's anything more than that. And that is what has to be explored. And as I understand President Reagan's reaction, he has said that is what the United States intends to do at Geneva.
So therefore the United States is going to take a cold look at it at Geneva. But as a Sovietologist, perhaps you can tell me about this. I mean, the key to it has got to be Gorbachev himself. Is he a man of a different caliber, a different outlook, more sophisticated, and more perhaps amenable to reasonable discussions?
think the answer is only time will tell. He certainly is a better public relations man than his predecessor. I think we tend to exaggerate how good he is because his predecessors for the past 5 or 6 years have been very old, very feeble, and very slow and rigid individuals.
Well, his proposition seems to be quite clear to me, for all I know about it, which is that much, that if the Russian plan to get rid of the nuclear weapons by $2,000 is going to be accepted, it will only come if the Americans plan this somewhat terrifying SDI, Strategic Defense, what do you call it? Initiative. Am I right on that?
Gorbachev himself has said continually that research, an ambiguous term, cannot really be prevented. However, the Soviet negotiators in Geneva have consistently insisted on a total ban on research, something that is unverifiable, virtually meaningless, and suggests that they are engaged in nothing but a propagandistic effort to block the Strategic Defense Initiative. In Gorbachev's latest offer of last week, he seems again to have said that research is permissible, and that the negotiations should focus on the post-research phase of development, of engineering, of deployment of weapons, and so forth and so on. That is certainly a much more interesting, much more negotiable kind of proposition than the one that the Soviets have had on the table in Geneva so far.
But one of his propaganda moves, which seems to be, have some effect, is that they've extended the Soviet moratorium on nuclear testing, even though the United States refused to accept that concept at all, except in the stratosphere.
The United States has not agreed to what was clearly a propagandistic declaration of a moratorium from Moscow, a declaration that immediately followed a whole series of Soviet nuclear weapons tests, and that immediately preceded some American weapons tests that they knew were scheduled. So.
Is there an offer on the table from the Americans? This has always been kind of confusing to me, that they're prepared to share the SDI information and to put both nations on the same level of defensive posture.
The president is on record as saying that he wants to share any technology that does emerge from this research effort and negotiate a transition from a very dangerous offensive-oriented force posture to a defensive arms regime, which will provide both sides with a greater measure of security than they now enjoy.
In other words, if that were accepted, miracles might happen yet, the concept of mutual assured destruction would be a silly way to put it, would be threatened. Equally defensive, a chance of peace.
That is correct. You would move to a world of mutually assured security.
Tell me this, though, before I take a break. Are you hopeful at all, or are we immediately heading into another of these incredibly difficult things to understand of propaganda and counter-propaganda with no genuine negotiations?
I'm optimistic that the Soviets will indeed negotiate. I am confident that the United States is prepared to negotiate, and it seems to me that the Soviets have moved increasingly, and this is a tribute, it seems to me, to the negotiating position of the present American administration. Soviets have moved toward negotiable positions on all three of the chief issues at the Geneva Arms Talks.
Well, you're almost telling me you're a little bit hopeful.
I'm a little bit hopeful.
I have a few more questions for Jeremy Azreal, difficult name to pronounce, Azreal. And I want you to join in, because you know more about foreign affairs than I do, most of you, after the break. I'm going to try and pick the brain now of Jeremy Azreal from the Rand Corporation. Give me a paragraph from the Rand Corporation, first of all. I thought of typewriters right away. I know it's a think tank, but what is the Rand Corporation?
The RAND Corporation is a non-profit, not-for-profit research company in Santa Monica, California, that does contract research for the U.S. government and for many of the state governments in the United States. About half its research is on national security kinds of issues, and the other half of its research is on domestic issues, health delivery systems and so forth and so on.
But you, with your background, could give me an idea of how things are within the Soviet Union. We're told that the Soviet Union is being democratized to some extent. Is it? Or is it the same old solid dictatorship we always think of it as?
Well, it's this. It certainly is a dictatorship, and it certainly is not, in my opinion, being democratized. Gorbachev has come in talking a great deal about reform, economic reform. In fact, he has moved very slowly, even in that area. But like his mentor, Andropov, his talk of domestic economic reform has really been accompanied by an increase in political repression, by a crackdown on the remains of the dissident movement. There certainly has been there have been no signs of improvement on the human rights front. And in that sense, you alluded earlier to President Reagan's reference to the Soviet Union as an evil empire. I'm prepared to say that that was an impolitic or an undiplomatic thing to say. And yet it's important to remember that the Soviet Union is an empire, that Moscow controls essentially captive population, certainly in terms of the non-Russians of the Soviet Union, who constitute about 50% of the Soviet population, and that it treats its population, Moscow treats its population in ways that Western political philosophers would have described always as evil.
But at the same time, while I winced at the evil empire, I didn't wince in the slightest when Reagan called Gaddafi a barbarian.
Well,
that's just from where I sit. Is that right? Is that just because there's a prospect that we in North America might see some of the depredations of this dreadful man?
Mr. Gaddafi certainly has been behaving barbarously, and it's worth noting as we talk about possible changes in the Soviet role in the world that not only have the Soviets armed Libya to the teeth, not only have the Soviets facilitated the training of Libyan terrorists, but the Soviets have recently installed anti-aircraft missiles in Libya and provided Soviet crews to man those missiles, very considerably escalating the tension in the area.
That could be the spark plug, and obviously the Soviet Union needn't be so concerned therefore about terrorism because they've got their insurance policy by supplying them arms and training.
Well, they also are willing to run very considerable risks in order to protect and pay very considerable costs in order to protect Mr. Gaddafi and keep him in power despite his barbarous behavior.
And at the same time, the Soviet Union has its own built-in protection against terrorism, in that if it did happen from anywhere, they would deal with it brutally and would never hear about it.
Well, the Soviets, of course, have been the victims of, Soviet diplomats have been the recently the victims of terrorists in the Middle East. There are press reports, the authenticity of which I know nothing about, that they responded with rather ruthless counter-terrorist acts.
And got their people back.
And got but one of their people back.
Yeah, they castrated a prisoner.
Well, so some press reports have said.
Kidnapped somebody, castrated them, and got their other guy back. Now, Afghanistan, though, looking at it coldly from the point of view of a thinker in the RAND Corporation, surely one must concede that Afghanistan as in the old days of the British Empire, Afghanistan is their area of influence. They want to protect those, that connection to the Indian Ocean. And the one doesn't expect anything else but the Russians to take firm steps in Afghanistan to make sure nobody unsympathetic can be on their borders. Is that not the old practical power politics?
Well, it's been a Western position, somewhat contentious one, for many years, that the Soviet Union is entitled to friendly governments on its borders. And after World War II...
Just like the U.S.
After World War II, we discovered, of course, in the case of Eastern Europe, that what the Soviet Union meant by friendly was what we mean by subservient. The Soviet Union had friendly relations with Afghan governments, as the Russian pre-revolutionary government did. Mm-hmm. It is clearly, to some degree, within legitimately within a Russian sphere of influence. What the Soviets have done is preside over the displacement of a merely friendly government and the installation through armed force, Soviet armed force, of a subservient government. The price they've paid is that they've lost the population in the process, which has formed a an insurgency to overthrow what is clearly a Soviet puppet regime.
You don't mind one cheap shot, do you? Grenada seemed to be the most insane exertion of power by one of the world powers in this silly little place, and in you go with everything. That was surely another impolitic action of the American administration. Now, in Canada, we have a problem here. Some of us feel that you may have another subservient government north of the 49th parallel. Not asking you to comment on that, but in Grenada, that was impolitic, to say the least, was it not?
Well, I don't really think it was impolitic. It was a police action undertaken with the full support and at the request of the governments in the region, which were very concerned at what was clearly the emergence in Grenada of a totally dependent and possibly politically subservient proto-Cuban, proto-Soviet regime. And they were disturbed, as the Pakistanis are disturbed at what's happening in Afghanistan. It is not pleasant to have a Soviet base or a possible Soviet base right next door.
I suppose it's comforting today, though, with the Russian proposition. Has that been tabled at Geneva?
It has not been tabled at Geneva unless it has been tabled in the past day or two, and but presumably it will be tabled this week, and then the interesting task of finding out what the details are and what the hookers are will begin.
It could be optimistic. Let's have some phone calls, please, to Jeremy Azreal from the Rand Corporation after the break. It's really hard. Go ahead to Mr. Azreal.
Yes, good morning. My question had to do with whether or not the Soviets have been putting forward any conventional arms reduction proposals, and the reason I bring that question up is the fact that I think it's pretty well recognized that the United States and the Soviet Union can't go to war on any scale, really, because of the fear that eventually that they will use the weapons, even if they temporarily would destroy them. And there doesn't seem to be much talk. Conventional weapons always seems to be a secondary side issue. Oh yes, we'll talk about that later. But I think that really it's just as important, don't you?
Yes, I do. And indeed, as one thinks about a world without nuclear weapons, if one can really imagine turning the clock back, it's worth remembering that the whole history of Western nuclear weapons is importantly involved with an effort to redress an imbalance in conventional forces where the Soviets always enjoyed superiority and where they still do enjoy superiority. Now that's a problem that the countries of Western Europe and the United States have been addressing with the Soviets and some of the countries of the Warsaw Pact for 15 years now in some talks in Vienna known as the Mutual Balanced Force Reduction talks. Those talks, as the 15-year duration suggests, have made very slow progress. But there are some interesting, there have been some interesting developments in the past month or two, most particularly a new U.S. or new Western proposal that goes some way to meeting some long-standing Soviet concerns. The Soviets have not been, to date, very responsive, but perhaps in the context of the new Gorbachev initiative, they'll be more so.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. I'd like to ask a question and perhaps make a few comments, if I could, as a physician belonging to the group, the Physicians for Social Responsibility. I'd like to ask Mr. Azreal, I wanted to make clear, he is funded by the CIA. Is that right? The Central Intelligence Agency of the United States government?
No.
No is the answer.
The answer, to make it clear, is in no way.
Oh, in other words, the CIA has not contributed to this study and to your appearance here in Canada.
In no way, shape, or form.
I see. The CIA, I perhaps misunderstood, and I had heard that the RAND Corporation had done studies funded by the CIA, which is the same agency, I believe you would, knowing your corporation's investigation of various things, that was involved in the Chile debacle in which the CIA undercover
Let's cut this short.
Funded...
just a minute. Was the RAND Corporation involved in the overthrow of Allende in Chile?
Yes.
No. What's the answer?
No.
The answer is no. Have you any other questions?
Well, I just wanted to make clear that the RAND Corporation, I suspect, is not quite as independent as it sometimes seems to be.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
I must say, I think at this point that in no way do I see that the Soviet Union is not as evil as it is undoubtedly doing things which are evil.
But just a minute, you've got too many double negatives there for me to understand you. They're doing things that are evil, and I think I'll let you pass on, sir. You're so convoluted. It's not censorship, it's editing. Go ahead from Victoria.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Yes.
Mr. Azreal, with regard to President Reagan's SDI, the so-called Star Wars, what would prevent, a so-called defensive system from becoming an offensive weapon system? An example would be like a laser system that stops incoming missiles. It could be used like a laser gun platform to incinerate cities.
Now, that's a terribly serious question, and it is a question that would have, as the Strategic Defense Initiative unfolds, would have to be explored seriously with the Soviets. Verification procedures and other procedures would have to be worked out mutually. I'm not a technical expert and can't begin to go into any of the details, but that's an issue that would have to be addressed seriously.
So we'd be actually frying pan fire situation.
If it were not addressed seriously, it certainly could be.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack. Yeah, I've always been informed by various sources that the RAND Corporation was the basic mouthpiece for the right-wing power elite in the States. Now, it seems my suspicions are being confirmed here. It was common knowledge in the newspapers everywhere except the United States, and even some in the States, that Grenada, the airport in Grenada that was claimed to be offensive and communist built, was built by the British, and it was built with Cubans who were invited by the British corporation that was building the airport.
Just a minute. I thought it was the Soviet that built the airport there.
No, the British were building it.
I frankly am not an expert on who was building the airport.
Well, I am, because I've read in several several sources that.
Okay,
to my
what's your
knowledge,
point?
The British were building the airport, and the Cubans were there at the request of the British.
What's
Cuban workers.
What's your question?
Well, my question is, how could they justify taking, sending a supposed police action into a country when this airport was being built by British construction firms, and the Cuban laborers there were not there at the request
No,
of any communist. They were
listen, I'm not paid by the CIA or the Rand Corporation. The British did not build the airport in Grenada.
Well, let me make perhaps a different point. First, as to the Rand Corporation, I can't resist as a point of personal privilege. It has, I think, among those who know it, a reputation for quite remarkable independence and for speaking back to power. If it has any public reputation at all, I would think it would come from Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers of Daniel Ellsberg of the Rand Corporation, who was scarcely, was not a voice of the Rand Corporation in that regard, but certainly wasn't a right-wing mouthpiece. Now, as to Grenada, I don't think the issue is who was building the airport. The issue is who was penetrating and controlling the government that would ultimately determine the use of the airport.
But we have only the American.
Give me just 1 second. There is a pretty fully documented record, documents that I believe no one questions, Grenadan government documents, which are publicly available, and which describe at great length the negotiations between the Grenadans and Marshal Agarkov and other Soviets about military supplies, about police training by the Soviet secret police, et cetera, et cetera. That wasn't a British company.
One more short segment with Jeremy Azreal after the break. Jeremy Azreal, who just made a very good defense of the Rand Corporation. I liked your point about Ellsberg being one of your boys. Daniel Ellsberg of the Pentagon Papers, and that means that you can't all be tapped with the label of right-wingers.
No, hardly.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Oh, did I use the wrong one? I'll take it anyway. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yep.
I've found in the June 1980 copy of Covert Action Information Bulletin, it says that Rand Development's CIA ties were made public as the result of an Interior Department expense inquiry reported in the New York Times.
Hold it there. What is this covert paper? Is that little intelligence summary we see from time to time?
It comes out of Washington, D.C.
Do you know it at all?
Yes, I do. Let me. I don't know how we got off onto the subject of the Rand Corporation, but the Rand Corporation does research for a whole range of U.S. government agencies on contract as a matter of public record. Among them, the Central Intelligence Agency, which of course is a large analytic organization where people analyze international affairs, as does the Rand Corporation. Sometime Rand is hired on contract by CIA to do such analytic studies.
Fair enough. Go ahead, please.
Oh, hello. I have two questions. One.
Yep. One. What happened to him? You gave him stage fright. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to address the fact that this latest USSR proposal towards the United States of a nuclear disarmament is, it's like a, if they go down to conventional weapons, they got 40,000 tanks that can go into Europe at any moment. And the Middle East crisis and terrorism is a voice to the fuel that they need to run those tanks into Europe.
Did you get his point?
Yeah, that, I think, if I understood correctly, that really is the point, and it's an important point that I was alluding to before. In a world without nuclear weapons, the great superiority that the Soviet Union enjoys in conventional forces may be even more worrisome than it is now. And
I think we'd take a chance in that, though, wouldn't we?
well,
If we came to Valhalla of no nuclear weapons, we could take a chance in conventional weapons.
well, although when we remember back to the situation after the war, when we remember the concerns of our European allies about whether the U.S. will be there in the event and so on, it's not a concern that can be lightly discounted. I would say that it is a concern that will have to be addressed and addressed very seriously if, as we hopefully will, we move down the path toward a great reduction in nuclear weapons.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Azreal. I support the U.S. position on Libya, but what I wonder is why don't the U.S. government put sanctions and pressure on Syria, since they have more of a smoking gun on the aid to terrorism, especially after the attacks in Rome and Vienna. I fear they're not doing it because it's not politically right instead of morally right.
I don't know very much about the about concrete ties between particular governments and particular terrorist activities. Therefore, I don't know about the alleged ties to which you allude. But certainly in the real world, there are difficult balances to be struck between moral and political considerations. I wouldn't want to discount the latter.
Fair enough. Go ahead, please.
Because Mr. Gorbachev is a young man relative to his predecessors, it would look as if he's going to have to see and live with the results of his efforts, perhaps through 2000. Does that give you any greater degree of comfort that the current negotiations will have some success, Mr. Azreal?
I think it's certainly that it is important that and encouraging that for the first time in a very long time there is someone at the other end of the line in Moscow whom you're reasonably confident can hold the phone in his own hand and hear what's being said and respond. That's a prerequisite for making the hard choices that both sides are going to have to make in order to move these negotiations forward. So in that sense, Gorbachev's youth and the prospect that he may be there for some time is a hopeful sign.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to Vancouver, Mr. Azreal.
Thank you.
I would just like to ask one question, a simple question, then hang up and listen to your answer if I may. It's simply, I'd like to ask you what your opinion is of the fact, and somewhat commonly held belief today, that an equality of nuclear weapons on both the Soviet and American side seems to be bringing about a position where the world is somewhat more stable, although more fearful of the possible effects of war. In any event, it may be more stable than it was in a situation without nuclear war. I'll hang up and listen to your answer.
I don't. I personally don't doubt that nuclear weapons have basically been a stabilizing factor, they make war, as the United States has long said, and as the Soviet Union has increasingly begun to say, unthinkable. That raises some very profound questions that we've alluded to a couple of times about whether a world without nuclear weapons would be less stable. Those are questions that have to be thought through. There are some real risks in returning to a nuclear-free world. The nuclear weapons have deterred countries from doing things, at least in the period since World War II, that through all of human history before, they felt relatively freer to do. And people died in the process in very large numbers.
Yeah, but the one snag being that if presuming both the USSR and the USA were totally stable on the matter, we're always faced now with the fear of the proliferation into the hands of irresponsible madmen.
Yeah, that's also a profound and disturbing issue.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. Quick question. The Soviet proposal on total disarmament by the year 2000, did that hinge on abandoning SDI research?
Mr. General Secretary Gorbachev, in his proposal, as read over Moscow radio and television, in parenthesis, one of the disturbing things about that proposal is that it was publicized so quickly. It suggests that propagandistic considerations may have been very more important in it than substantive considerations. End parenthesis. In those remarks, Gorbachev alluded to development, testing, I've forgotten his exact words, but did not mention a ban on research. And that it may signify an abandonment of an earlier and unacceptable Soviet condition, and may facilitate some more interesting negotiations.
In other words, when you interpret these things first time around, you've got to look for what's not in the speech and balance against what was said about that or not said about that in an earlier speech. Fascinating man you are, Jeremy Azreal, from the Rand Corporation. Thanks again. And you leave me with a little touch of hope.
Good.
First time in a long while. And I'll be back with a free-for-all after the break. Well, I found that guy from the Rand Corporation quite interesting. At least it's nice to think there's just a slight possibility of a thaw. Free for all. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, it's Sean Jestley from the Interior. We were talking about tax deductions.
Yeah. Go on, Sean, you're on the air.
Yeah, and how people use these tax shelters for things like that. If these government people wanted tax shelters, why not put their tax shelter into donations to communities to get hydro where the government won't put the hydro in?
Because the provincial government can't do any such thing. The amount raised in the tax shelter in Western Pulp was $110 million, which went to the companies partly to redo the pulp mill at Squamish. If the provincial government had the taxing authority, they might well be able to do that. In the United States, they have an even better tax fiddle for the rich, in that they have tax-free municipal bonds. And my very simplified understanding of it, and perhaps someone south of the border can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you invest X amount of money in, say, $1,000 in a bond in Seattle, and you get 10% interest, which is free of, or maybe less, free of income tax. However, there was recently a great disaster in the state of Washington called WOOPS, which was the financing by tax-free bonds of a number of nuclear power stations in which there were incredible troubles. And the people who put their money in the tax-free bonds have lost, in many cases, I believe, all of their capital. That's the answer to that one. Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Oh, hello. I wanted to know why all the anti-choice people are putting so much time and money into being concerned about a collection of cells yet unborn, when they could be helping all these children who have disappeared. Little children who are being used in these horrible sex films and things. Why aren't they doing something about that, about children who are already born and alive and missing?
Ma'am, let me say this to you. I gave the pro-choice people 2 segments the other day, and I'm giving the pro-life people 2 segments this Thursday morning. And I think you're, even though I favor, choice to a certain extent, I think you're drawing far too long a bow for it to be of any common sense. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I was wondering what your opinion is of toll charges that are going to be charged on the new Coquihalla Highway.
I predict that toll charges will be put on the new Coquihalla Highway if it does not conflict with a provincial election. If it goes on after a provincial election and the new government is in power, the toll charges will be removed shortly before the next provincial government.
Thanks, Jack.
It's happened so often it's not funny. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd just like to add
a little bit to the Grenada issue that came up. I was working in the Caribbean shortly before the Americans invaded down there, and I felt that the invasion was unjustified. I was working in Trinidad, which is the closest country to Grenada, and Trinidad had no opposition to the Grenadian government, even though Trinidad is pro-Western.
Answer me a question. I said arbitrarily, I could be wrong, that the British did not build the airport in Trinidad.
In Trinidad?
In Grenada.
British were involved in subcontracting. They were one of the subcontractors of the electrical.
Uh-oh.
So they were involved. The Cubans were doing the actual construction. The British were subcontractors, but in no way could it be construed as a military airfield because there were no underground fuel installations. There was no security fencing.
No refueling facility. Oh, well, that's good. But it obviously was a silly action. It was swatting a fly with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, I believe so. And they kind of tried to justify it by bringing up these Soviet connections. And there were really very few solid connections involved. And
then they bombed a hospital by accident, the old folks' home.
Yeah, also I'd like to add that a 10,000-foot runway is necessary in that climate because of the heat involved. And Reagan tried to justify that as using MiGs and
The good news is that in Trinidad and in that heat, a golf ball properly struck on a tee will go 50 yards farther.
Yeah.
Thank you. By the way, do you know the origin of the word trivia? Tri-via in Rome. 3 roads in the center of Rome where the citizenry used to stand and gossip on the tri-via, the 3 roads. Hence, ipso facto, quaerat demonstrandum, ex post facto, trivia. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, one question to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello?
Yes?
Yes, who do you know that's making money off the arms race in the Soviet Union?
Oh, a few
and
comments.
Who do you know that's making money off the arms race in the United States? I'll hang up for your answer.
Certainly. Who do I know that's making money off the arms race in the Soviet Union? I should imagine that supplies some employment and some wages and some black bread and some rubles and some comforts for the commissars in charge of the plants. Who do I know that's making money in the United States? The multinational corporations who supply jobs at some wages or another. I don't support making money off the arms race. But if somebody came into Vancouver today and said they would build that plant they don't want in PEI, Lytton Industries plant, many of the 205,000 unemployed in this province would jump for joy. The biggest issue in this province right now is jobs and the economy. And I don't know many skilled tradesmen and trade unions who would turn down jobs in an arms plant on the question of their opposition to the potential use of the weapons. And I'm just being practical about it. Oh, something went wrong. Go ahead from Victoria.
Good morning, Jack. It's Eric Mallett. Used to be with the telephone company. It's nice to hear you again. I was watching you.
Hello, Eric.
Eric Mallett.
Yes, I remember you well, Eric.
Very nice to hear you, and you look very healthy. The question I was going to ask you, Jack, was in connection with the island of Cuba. There was a great concern with Mr. Azreal regarding, and there was a lot of discussion about Grenada, but everybody seems to forget that the island of Cuba is only 90 miles from the American coast. And the question I wanted to ask you is the naval base Guantanamo still on the island of Cuba?
The answer is yes, it still is. Guantanamo, about which a song was written, is still on the island of Cuba, much to everyone's surprise. I suppose the greatest gaffe of any U.S. government was the failure properly to wean, adopt, encircle, embrace, and encompass Castro at the time when he was a fairly reasonable left-wing democratic socialist before he went the full party communist line. I think that's the biggest boo-boo the United States made in the Northern Hemisphere by 1,000 years.
Thank you very much for the answer, and it seems so strange being concerned about Grenada when they have Cuba so close.
Keep your head down, Eric, and swing slow. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack. I was wondering if you could shed any light on a new problem that's going to be on at the Ridge. It's a movie called Hail Mary, and I understand the local Catholics are up in arms trying to block it showing.
I watched an excellent report on BC TV Sunday News Hour in which it gave both sides of the story, that the former Roman Catholic opposition is adamant that it paints a totally improper picture of the Virgin Mary, and the manager was standing on the steps there saying, you know, he said a lot of unsympathetic letter, but no threats. My own position is it's freedom of choice.
Well, I was just a little concerned because I didn't know that the Catholics were against freedom of choice.
No, I don't try and be smart, Alec. There are people who, when their religious principles are held up to what they call ridicule and contempt, get very annoyed, and properly so, about it. My position is the movie's been made. You can either go see it and hate it, or go see it and be bored, or go see it and enjoy it, and you're not getting me into that can of worms. Go ahead, please.
Hi. A couple of things here. David Rockefeller and Armand Hammer, I understand, are the two Americans who are the only two Americans who are allowed to fly their own private planes over the Soviet Union and land there and get the beautiful red carpet treatment. I'm wondering if perhaps Mr. Hammer is in dealing in arms.
I don't know, ma'am, but my time is up. I wish I could catch a lift with David Rockefeller or Armand Hammer. I don't even know who the hell Armand Hammer is. American, oh, we had one too in Canada who was called Cyrus Eaton, who was very big in that field. Après le break. The man from the Rand Corporation whipped my lighter. Don't forget, if you want to come to Right to Live, Right to Die Forum, you can call now and give us your details at 420-3336, or long distance, collect 420-6444. I'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely.
Expo 86, 102 days to go.
How to start a new biz in the middle of a recession and win at 9 a.m. precisely. How to start a new business in the middle of the Depression, and 4 people who did and succeeded, no kidding. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely. I know what it is. What have we done?
Finds a hole in the market and fills it. What we have is a woman from New York who moved up here, realized that cookies sell and started a